Die Hard was released back in 1988. It's not even the famous 90s, but the end of the 80s. How many action movies can you remember from that time that are still being recalled and even reviewed? I think the list will be very short. In this video, we will try to figure out how, by today's standards, a not particularly original action movie has become a favorite movie of millions. What's so special about Die Hard? What allowed him to pass the test of time and become a true cult film? Many who have watched Die Hard in English, or are at least familiar with its original title Die Hard, often scold the translation localizers. Well, how is that? Where is there about some nuts? But if you find out how this film was translated in other countries, you may change your mind. Let's start with Germany. There, the local localizers approached with military directness.
Stirb langsam.
Die slowly sounds tempting, like an invitation to an action movie. But the French and Italians were unanimous. Their film was called
Piège à cristal.
Trappola di cristallo.
The Crystal Trap. Lyrically, there's nothing to say, but what does Crystal have to do with John McClane? He makes his way through the broken glass. The Poles followed a similar path and called the film
Szklana pułapka.
The Glass Trap, but at least more honestly, without crystal. The Spaniards decided to add a sparkle and called the film
Jungla de Cristal.
Crystal Jungle. Apparently, glass alone was not enough for them, and they had to add a tropical atmosphere. The Japanese, on the contrary, did not invent anything and translated it as close to the original as possible.
Die Hard.
As they say, simplicity is the key to success. But personally, I was most impressed by the Chinese localizers. Their name sounds like the courage of the tiger, the power of the dragon.
虎胆龙威.
That's where McClane definitely added epicness. So you know Die Hard is still pretty good. So what does Die Hard really mean? The problem with translating the phrase arose due to the fact that it is actually an idiom, that is, a turn of speech, the meaning of which is not determined by the composition of the words included in it. If you are asked to translate the phrase kick-ass into English, you will not translate it literally. Die Hard translates to die hard, but in English it is an idiom that describes something or someone so stubborn that even death does not take it. For example, they say, "Old habits die hard, old habits are difficult to eradicate." In the case of the film Die Hard, the title speaks to John McClane's tenacity and tenacity. He refuses to give up, he is unbendable and incorrigible. That's what Die Hard means. It's not about death, but rather about the ability to fight to the last. In order to understand why John McClane so sunk into the soul of the audience, it is worth remembering the spirit of that era and those heroes who were at their peak then. The 80s were the golden era of action movies, a time when the genre was in its heyday. This is the era of big explosions and invulnerable pumped-up heroes who could single-handedly defeat an army of enemies. In those years, such stars as Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Jean-Claude Van Damme, and Chuck Norris shone on the screens. Their heroes were superhumans, literally invulnerable. They went to the breach, breaking down obstacles and sending dozens of enemies to the next world. The army theme prevailed, tough guys from special forces or war veterans who were confronted by an entire army. One of the most striking examples of that time is the 1985 film, The Team, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. A former Special Forces soldier organizes a bloodbath to save his daughter. During the course of the film, he destroys more than 80 people while remaining virtually unscathed. This is not just a hero, but practically a Superman. This also includes John Rambo, the character of Sylvester Stallone in the movie Rambo, First Blood, Part 2 of the same year in 1985. He kills 75 people, demonstrating complete control over the situation. These are heroes who do not experience fear, pain, and doubt, and not just machines for destruction. It is no coincidence that when the casting for the role of John McClane began, after reading the script, many stars of that time simply refused this role. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, among others, because John was not impressive against the background of the heroes of that time. A new type of hero led to the success of the film, which completely changed the rules of the game. The film set trends for action films with a lone hero, where one person confronts a whole group of enemies in one limited location. McClane spends most of his time acting alone, communicating with criminals via walkie-talkie, and sharing his thoughts with another policeman.
I'm here, John.
Listen, man, I'm starting to get a bad feeling up here. I want you to do something for me.
All the action is concentrated inside one location, the Nakatomi skyscraper, which adds a special atmosphere and makes the film chamber like. And the scenes where he conducts dialogues on a walkie-talkie resemble a radio play. Over time, it turned into a cliché, but then in 1988, Die Hard was an absolute innovator. This approach has inspired a whole wave of films that have taken this format as a basis. Under Siege with Steven Seagal is a tough nut to crack on the ship. The President's Plane starring Harrison Ford and Wesley Snipes is once again a die-hard airplane ride. Under Siege 2, Die Hard on the train. Speed with Keanu Reeves, Die Hard on the bus. Storming the White House is a tough nut to crack in the White House. Sudden Death with Van Damme is a tough nut to crack in the stadium. Rock Climber is a tough nut to crack in the mountains. These are just the most famous copying attempts. Some of them still remember today, but most of them were never able to get close to the Die Hard, and it's more about the hero himself. The key difference between John McClane and the heroes of that time was that he was not superhuman, did not wear camouflage, and did not distribute kilograms of ammunition left and right. In the entire film, McClane kills only 10 people. If the heroes of the 80s resembled the gods who descended from Olympus, then McClane was one of us, an ordinary policeman who found himself in an extreme situation, someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, a man who is desperately fighting for his life and those he loves. And as it turned out, it was much easier for the viewer to empathize with such a character, and it was easier to associate themselves with him. Not everyone can imagine themselves in the place of the hero Schwarzenegger or Stallone. But if you were John McClane, why not? He's not an ex-Marine, he's not an undercover agent. McClane was not just an action hero, he reflected the trends of his era. At the center of his character's disclosure was his relationship with his wife, who was on the verge of divorce. And this is not accidental.
I missed you.
I guess you didn't miss my name, though, huh?
The 80s saw the peak of divorce in the United States. For every 10 marriages, there were about 4 divorces. This period was marked by significant social changes. Individualism and career ambitions have come to the fore. Working hours increased and families increasingly faced time constraints and emotional distance.
Hello, Lucy McClane. This is your mother speaking.
Mommy! When are you coming home?
Changes in traditional gender roles also added to the tension. Women became more independent, aspired to a career, which sometimes came into conflict with established expectations about family life. For the generation of the 80s, this situation was painfully familiar. McClane and his wife, Holly, became a symbol of the era, torn apart. They saw a reflection of their own experiences, which made McClane especially close and understandable. It's unusual for that time. The invulnerable hero of the action movie is just a policeman from New York who works hard to the detriment of his family life.
She had a good job, turned into a great career.
The one who flew to California to see his children and make peace with his wife. John is his own guy who has to fight not only terrorists, but also bureaucratic stupidity. He acts on a system overreach, relying on common sense and his own instincts. The authorities are shown here as exceptional imbeciles.
Happening. Can't you read between the lines?
It's on the right channel?
Yes, sir.
He did everything he could to save him.
They're not able to make quick decisions, do not listen to those who know the situation from the inside, and hinder more than they help.
Silly son of a bitch you've been talking to on that radio.
Excuse me, sir. But what about the body that fell out the window?
Well, who knows? It's probably some stockbroker got depressed. We're ready for you, Chief.
I'm on your side, you assholes! Shit. Swing around again! I'll bag this little bastard!
Against this background, individual people in the field, such as Sergeant Powell, stand out. These are simple people who help John not because of instructions from above, but at the behest of their hearts.
They're shooting at him.
It's panic fire. They can't see anything.
They're shooting at the lights.
At the same time, John does not lose his sense of humor, which becomes his peculiar weapon.
In the world, and I gotta kill one with feet smaller than my sister.
His sarcastic comments and witty remarks not only add lightness to the film, but also show that McClane remains human even in the most critical situation. Have you ever noticed that films from the 80s sometimes seem more realistic than many blockbusters made much later? Why do scenes shot several decades ago still make us believe in what is happening, while many modern paintings look unnatural and simply disgusting? It's about the effects, or rather, how they were created. The 80s are the era before CGI. Computer graphics were just beginning to develop, and most directors used so-called practical special effects. Everything we saw on the screen was created manually. Miniatures, pyrotechnics, real physical structures. And Die Hard was created exactly according to this principle. Director John McTiernan relied entirely on real-life effects. For example, the explosion at the top of the Nakatomi skyscraper is the result of shooting a scaled-down model of the building. Over time, in the 90s and especially in the 2000s, CJ began to gain momentum, but the technology was still quite raw. She was able to surprise the viewer of that time, but looking back, today it becomes obvious that the practical effects of the 80s look much better than subsequent paintings. Moreover, they have not lost their relevance even today. In modern cinema, computer graphics have become the standard of the film industry. Today it is difficult to find a film that would do completely without her, but the irony is that despite a decade of technology development, CGI still often looks artificial. Why is that? When CG tries to simulate reality, for example, the faces of people or animals, viewers begin to notice the smallest imperfections. Strange movements. CG objects often do not interact with the environment the way a real object does. This is manifested in the absence of correct shadows or reflections, incorrect physics of movements. For example, the weight of an object is not felt, and real light behaves in a difficult way. It scatters, reflects, and penetrates materials. CG objects are often illuminated too perfectly, which gives away their artificial origin. We intuitively know how objects look and move in real life. When CG deviates from these expectations, even just a little bit, it's immediately noticeable. The directors, of course, are aware of this problem. That is why, despite the complexity and high cost, they continue to use practical effects. For example, Christopher Nolan avoids CGI wherever possible and uses it only to refine scenes so that the audience does not notice his presence. For the movie, he blew up a real airplane, not a CG model. I tried to minimize the influence of CG in sharp visors as well. Even the recreation of a nuclear explosion during the Trinity test was realized without the use of computer graphics, using practical effects.
What kind of odds am I getting?
You don't want to know.
Put me down for 20. I'm good for it.
This approach allows you to maintain a sense of reality and engagement, which is so often lacking in modern films. And in this regard, Die Hard remains relevant, proving that the old methods are able to withstand the test of time and still delight the audience. Do you remember the scene where McClane pulls shards of glass out of a bloody leg? You feel this pain as if you stepped on broken glass yourself. And if we recall the irreplaceable heroes of the militants who easily run after a few shots in the stomach or shoulder, it becomes obvious what distinguishes Die Hard from other militants. Our hero walked barefoot on the glass, and this has already become a serious problem for him. Look at the other details. McClane is sweating. His clothes are smeared with dirt and blood. He is breathing heavily, and all this literally screams about how difficult it is for him. You believe in him because you see, this person lives in the real world, where there is pain and fatigue.
I'm a cop from New York.
New York?
Yeah. Got invited to the Christmas party by mistake. Who knew?
The shootings themselves in the film also work for this realism. They are designed so that every encounter poses a real threat to the hero. Each shootout is unique and requires McClane's resourcefulness. He improvises, invents, and gets out of difficult situations, creating tension that keeps the viewer going until the finale. At the same time, Die Hard manages to find the perfect balance between entertainment and realism. Shooting, explosions, hand-to-hand combat, it all looks dynamic and exciting, but it remains believable. Even decades later, the action movie doesn't look outdated. All this was made possible by the use of practical effects. Blanks, pyrotechnics, carefully planned stunts. This is not just a beautiful sight, but a real challenge for the hero, which makes the viewer experience with him. And when you compare it with modern action movies, where the characters go through dozens of enemies without even stumbling, it becomes obvious why Die Hard remains the benchmark of the genre.